might change.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay, excellent. So if you want to bring her in, Alan is sitting there, and she can, if depending how many people she arrives with, she can either sit here at this. You can come up and. So is it, okay, that's good. Okay, we good? Okay. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for being here today. We've got a very full day followed by a very full evening, so I'm going to try and keep things moving along a pace here. It is a great pleasure to be here for both the annual conference, our annual conference, and for the induction dinner. And having just come through a few years of COVID, I think we all greatly appreciate the opportunity to be together as a fellowship and to be able to exchange ideas and learn who are the people who are fellows of the Canadian Academy of Engineering. I would like to start by acknowledging and thank the Lekwungen people on whose land we are holding this meeting, known as the Soheil and the Esquimalt First Nations, and also just slightly to the north, the Wasanich people. The past, present, and future for their stewardship, care, and leadership on these lands. As an urban Indigenous organization, we acknowledge that we are guests on their lands, and we also give thanks to the ancestors, supernatural ones, leaders and matriarchs, creatures big and small, for looking after the rich resources and cultural teachings of this beautiful land. And I just, on a personal note, I would like to say the Academy is fully embracing decolonization, indigenization, and the understanding of engineering through an Indigenous perspective all across the country with the different Indigenous peoples. I myself coming from the land, the unceded territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. Thank you for that. So we have just an amazing set of people to kick off the session. And I'd like to start by, some of you met him last night at the session, but Dr. Soheil Asgarpour, President of the Canadian Academy of Engineering. Soheil, I'd like you to come to the podium and say a few words of greeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, for the kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, bonjour et bienvenue. Welcome to the 36th annual conference of the Canadian Academy of Engineering. We are truly thrilled to have all of you today with us to embark on this exciting event. Before we commence, I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to all of you that attended the reception last night. It was about meeting each other, connecting ideas, connecting projects, forming partnership, etc. And I'm hoping that you have done some part, and if you haven't, then still there are 2 days left to do it. I hope you had also a fantastic trip to coming to beautiful Victoria. As you are aware, the mission of the Canadian academies, we have three major objectives. The first one is leadership in the responsible application of engineering knowledge for the benefit of Canadians. And when we talk about the benefit of the Canadians, we are talking about our planet, our people, etc. And that is our responsibility to carry on. The second part is to provide strategic advice to decision makers and policy makers to contribute to shaping the future of engineering. This is a very important area that I think actually this year for the first time we are doing it in a big way. And you will hear from me later on some of the initiatives we are taking. And then of course, recognizing and honoring outstanding engineering achievements and service to the profession. And this is gonna be essentially done at the induction. So the first two objectives I mentioned is gonna be happening here today at the conference. The third one is tonight at the induction event. So we are very fortunate to have an exceptional lineup of great speakers today with us. It's my privilege to welcome Senator Rosa Galvez as our first speaker. Senator Galvez's remarkable expertise and dedication to environmental engineering have made her an influential figure in demonstrating leadership in the responsible application of engineering knowledge for the benefits of all Canadians. We are very grateful that Dean Hoorfar is going to introduce her to us shortly. In addition, we are thrilled to have Minister Bowinn as our second speaker. Minister Ma's contributions to transportation engineering and her visionary approach to sustainable infrastructure have earned her widespread recognition. We extend our thanks to Alan Winter, a distinguished member of our community, for introducing Minister Ma, who will undoubtedly inspire all of us. Once again, I want to express my deepest gratitude to all of you joining us today. Your presence and active participation make this conference truly an extraordinary event. So in advance, I want to thank all of you for your active participation. I hope we are going to have an engaging and enriching experience throughout the event, and I encourage you to get involved in the CAE's activities and also collaborate with each other. Let us start the 36th annual conference of the Canadian Academy of Engineering with great enthusiasm. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Asgarpour. Good morning and warm welcome to 2023 CAE National Conference. As the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Computer Science and a brand new CAE Fellow, I'm very pleased and honored to welcome all of you to our beautiful city, Victoria. On behalf of our entire UVic community, our President, Dr. Kevin Hall, and our Provost, Dr. Elizabeth Croft, I would like to extend my greetings and best wishes for a successful conference. If this is your first time, we're pleased to meet you, and we hope you enjoy your time here. And please take time to visit our university and explore our beautiful city. If this is a return visit, welcome back to the home of one of Canada's most innovative and future-focused universities and one of the country's most vibrant and dynamic coastal cities. Our region features a rapidly growing high-technology sector and diversified economy powered by top-level research and innovation happening right here at UVic. We are thrilled that Victoria is hosting our conference this year. This is an occasion for us to celebrate innovation, foster collaboration, share ideas, tackle challenges, pursue opportunities, and to push the boundaries of what is possible. There will be exciting and spirited discussions around critical topics over the next couple of days, including on energy transitions and clean energy pathways, equity, diversity and inclusion, resilient building, the future of fusion energy, and many important and topical issues. And many of the top minds and talents all gathered in this room are going to participate and share their perspectives and expertise. Now more than ever, the skills and talents in this room are required to engineer the future and to define new possibilities. Since our founding 60 years ago, the University of Victoria has always been at the forefront of technological advancements, and our Faculty of Engineering and Computer Science at UVic is renowned for its commitment to excellence in education and research. We believe that the path to progress lies in nurturing diverse talents, encouraging interdisciplinary collaboration, and embracing emerging technologies. UVic is a place where things are happening, and happening fast. Over the past 10 years, our faculty has doubled its size, and we're not done yet. Looking ahead, we will soon be breaking ground on 2 new incredible buildings, an expanded engineering computer science building and a new high bay research structures lab. By adding these 2 new buildings, we will be able to consolidate our faculties into new purpose-built facilities and continue to provide a dynamic learning environment for our students. In addition, co-locating all the engineering design studios and laboratories will facilitate greater student and faculty interactions and support interdisciplinary activities that we really believe in. And over the next few years, we'll be adding hundreds of new student seats and hiring dozens of new faculty members. For far too long, UVic Faculty of Engineering and Computer Science has been one of Canada's best kept secrets. But my job as a dean is to change that. I look forward to speaking with many of you during the conference and sharing insights and ideas and letting you know why I'm so passionate about UVic and our profession. When you see me in the sessions, please come and say hello. I would be happy to chat with you and get to know you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Senator Galvez. Senator Rosa Galvez, originally from Peru, is one of Canada's leading experts in pollution control and its effect on human health. She has a Ph.D. in environmental engineering from McGill University and has been a professor at University of Laval in Quebec since 1994, heading the Civil and Water Engineering Department from 2010 to 2016. Dr. Galvez was appointed to the Senate of Canada as an independent senator for Quebec on December 6, 2016. Senator Galvez specializes in water and soil decontamination, waste management and residues, and environmental impact and risk assessment. She has advised an important number of international organizations, including on Canada-US and Quebec-Vermont agreements regarding the protection of the Great Lakes, the St. Lawrence River, and Lake Champlain. She also conducted an important study on the catastrophic oil spill at Lac Mégantic, Quebec. Senator Galvez is a member of the Ordre des Ingénieurs du Canada and a fellow of Canadian Society for Civil Engineering and Engineers Canada. Her research has led her around the world to countries such as France, Italy, Belgium, Japan, and China. Please join me in warm welcoming Senator Galvez to the podium.
Good morning. Thank you so much for this kind invitation. I am always thrilled and I am always so feeling at home when I have to talk to my fellow colleagues, engineers. It is such a pleasure to be here, especially in beautiful Victoria. So let me see if this, I'm okay with this. Should we go? Yes, okay. One title that not many people give me when they introduce me is and is the one that I love the most, is to be called mommy. I'm a grandmother of 2 grandchildren. And the way that just they pronounce, the way they look at me, the way they run after me, it just have, you know, put emphasis on the reasons because I do what I do. And I hope you'll think the same, because I'm sure here you are all parents, you are all uncles, and you worry about the future of your children. So the issue is that for many years we have seen environment in opposition with economy. We always say environment versus economy. It's like they contradict one to each other. It is true, it's a complex problem. For sure, it is a complex problem. But we are engineers, we are problem solvers, and we carry different hats at different points in our lives. And I think that the disconnections of these hats has brought us to this issue, this cul-de-sac that many people call we are with respect to our degrading environment. So we have to change this paradigm. We have to move, and instead of thinking and reflecting in solving problems in silos, we need to think more holistically. We need to see the interconnections. Let me tell you that my last 7 years in the Senate have shown me this, is that we are governed by different departments that don't talk to each other, and that they come up with many great initiatives without taking in consideration the unintended consequences into the other areas. And we have to solve these things. Yes, overpopulation, yes, overconsumption, yes, technology is not the solution to everything. Our economic system is linear. We have to make it circular, because we cannot continue treating the planet as we've been treating it. 60% of everything that we extract from the planet ends up in a landfill, as a plastic patch in the Pacific, in the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas emissions. So we have to really end this linear economy with its externalities that is causing the destruction of our planet. And not because of the planet, because the planet will keep spinning. The planet will keep being there. It's because of us. It's because of our social network and the existence of humanity that is here in danger. It's not the planet. So everybody has to assume the responsibilities, and we have to stick to some principles that we have given in law, and that we have to implement those principles that we have enshrined in law. We have increased the carbon print, but also the resources print per capita. I could spend hours talking to you about the planetary boundaries and the limits of our economic model, but I cannot do that. I have a limited time. And what I want to say is that science is always ahead. And you know, we as engineers, we follow science. We apply what science says. So we know that science is always ahead of us. And then we, technologists, and we developers of technologies, we follow. And we try to follow science as fast as science progresses. But very back is policy. And policy takes an eternity. I will just tell you one simple example. We just modernized CEPA, is the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, after 24 years, as if science didn't progress, as if technology didn't progress in the last 24 years. And it's the same thing for many, many, many other legislation. We are a very turtle, slow pace, and we have to accelerate these things. So the scientists have told us that there are 9 planetary systems that controls and regulate the planet, making it hospitable to human life. But with the pollution, whether it is in gas form, in solid form, or in liquid form, we are disequilibrating these mechanisms. And so oceans are acidifying, greenhouse gases are warming the planet, Canada warms up. In the south of Canada, we warm up 1.5 degrees faster, 1.5 times faster than the median, the average in the planet. But the Arctic, until last year, we were told that we were warming up 3 times faster. Now, in certain areas, it is 5 times faster, you know? And then we don't know also all the interconnections, all the ripple effect that one of each of these planetary disruptions causes in the other ones. But I think that the wildfires is an indication today of all these ripple effects. So, again, scientists came and says, well, not everything is doomed. We have to rethink. Our linear economic model cannot continue. It has to be circular. We have to design things, thinking in recycling, reusing, repairing, you know, and if cannot be recycled, reused, repairing, then it should be taken out from production. We must, if we recycle, we must include legislation that mandates that recycled material is used in new material, so we use less new natural material. And there are these scientists that says that on one hand, we have a floor because there are so many countries that still need access to health, access to justice, access to democracy. And so there are many underdeveloping or developing countries that still need to bring up their quality of life and their rights as human rights. But on the other hand, we have a roof given by the planetary limits that tell us we cannot go beyond that. This year, the overshooting day for Canada was March 22nd. That means that in only few months, we use all the resources that we're supposed to use in the whole year. In the 70s, the overshooting day for Canada was 27 December. So that was more sustainable. Now in 3 months, we use everything. It is unsustainable. Something will happen. And you know, I don't need to tell you because you're seeing it with your own eyes that things are happening. And if you're not seeing it, then it's something wrong. Then it's because we are still with our heads in the sand and we are not seeing what is happening. I was very involved in engineering development in my career as an academic in university. But since I am in the Senate, I'm hearing not only from engineers, I'm hearing from indigenous people, I'm hearing from youth, the anxiety we are creating by not having a plan to address this issue of pollution. So, as I said, I cannot talk about the 9 mechanisms. I will talk only about one, which is climate change, which it used to be at the very beginning when scientists start talking about it, planet warming. That was the name, planet warming. At the point, it has changed for climate change, which seemed to be, you know, a vague, ambiguous type of labeling that doesn't allow us to see what is really happening. And that we are like the frog in the pot that is boiling. And the frog is there, and we were fine, and it was really warming. And I was just telling this morning that 20 years ago, in a Montreal conference, I listened to the mayor of Montreal saying, why are we panicking? 1.5, 1 degree more, it will just bring more tourists, it will bring more agriculture, it will bring more business, and we will be fine. You know, but it's not like that. It's not like that. It's not like we are in control of a thermostat that we will little by little heating it up. It's just going uncontrolled, unfortunately. I will tell you something. One of my daughters works at Soheil, which is the organization that trains and operates the bombers and the firefighters, okay? So I follow them because I'm worried. So we don't have enough boomers. We don't have enough firefighters. So right now, we were bringing people from all over the world, and we were training people, whoever wanted to, in a panic mode, in a last-minute thing to do to try to control what it's impossible to control. And I hear what National Defense says because I go to meetings, and then I hear things like, yes, we are going to send um, the military. We're going to send the army, yes. But then I hear, oh, but this is just symbolic, because in reality, they cannot do much. So these are like really disturbing things. So we can see at the problem of climate change and say, okay, this is a picture, and today we see that China, India, Brazil, and United States, they are responsible of all the greenhouse gas emissions. Or we can say, no, this is a film that started 40 years ago, and that it has been accumulated in the atmosphere, and the developed nations have a role, very important role, in accumulation of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. And why I say this is because when I go to COP in Egypt or in Glasgow or in Spain before, one of the big discussions is about what is our fair share and how are we going to help those indigenous developing countries to cope with the struggles of floods, wildfires, and heat domes, and all of this. And I see that a lot of you are, like me, immigrants. And I see that for sure you have families in developing countries. And so I heard, while I was in Egypt, the Ministry of Environment of Pakistan showing how her whole country, 2/3 of her country, were underwater. And she is saying, how I'm going to rebuild my country, and who's going to help me to rebuild my country. And so it's important to see where we are. So Canada, unfortunately, we have failed to attain any greenhouse gas emissions reductions that we have fixed to ourselves. We should really think, why is that? Why, as a developed country, as a member of the G7, we haven't succeeded in reducing our greenhouse gas emission? And I tell you something, is that there is a fight between the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Natural Resources on what is our real greenhouse gas emission. Both recognize that they are underestimated. So there is one line there, and then is the top, and that doesn't count today's wildfire smokes. So we are very much underestimating what we contribute with to that. And if you look at the graph at the far right or left, is that out of the G7, we are the only country that have not succeeded in decoupling the growth, economic growth, from our greenhouse gas emissions. So there is something to work there. So there is this situation. I'm discussing, and I will, if you take a look at this white paper, is aligning climate, aligning finances with climate commitments. It's in my website. I have reflected a lot on why we are not able to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. But I can tell you this, is that I've been in conversations with the financial sector, which includes the banks, the insurance, the pension plans, and while they tell me clearly and loudly that they are very worried about the climate-related risk to their sector because of these extreme weather events that are destroying infrastructure before the end of their lifetime. So can you imagine, you're a municipality, you have a bridge, and you're still paying it, and then a flood came, destroyed the thing, and who's going to pay the rest? And insurance saying, I'm sorry. And insurance are in a big reflection today, trying to decide, is this a man-made cause, or is this a God's act? And that's going to take them some time to decide. But be sure that it's not going to cost to them. It's going to cost to all of us. And so on one hand, they are saying, yes, we are worried about this. We are worried that these extreme weather events are causing so much struggles. I can tell you there is a big insurance company that tell me, you know, that they were very close to call for bankruptcy. Why? Because there were 4 provinces that were experiencing extreme weather events, and there were thousands of claims. But on the other hand, these same financial institutions, the same ones, they are keep fueling the climate crisis because they are keep investing in things that we should be phasing out. So there is this incoherence. And again, this is what I say when I talk about the government, you know, doing some things and then doing almost the opposite. So you are engineers. And so you know that our infrastructure follows linear design. So when one infrastructure fails, there are many that are going to fail because we construct them in line. Think about the highway, think about the railroad, think about the electric transmission line, everything, water, everything is in line. And so what we are seeing in every case of extreme weather event destruction is that there is not only one system that fails, but many systems fail. And so that makes it very difficult for emergency responses to be able to satisfy and attenuate the destructions. So we have given by United Nations, you know, the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, and we know, you know, I'm sure you know, you're aware because you are in the technology field, is that we are in a new industrial revolution and that we are moving. You know that digitalization is there, analog is over, and that automatization is there. So this is the knowledge economy. But at the same time, COVID must have left us with some very important lessons. We cannot let go past this big event of a pandemic without leaving us lessons. And I'm sure many of you are professors, and I remember myself telling to my students, this is what I can teach you, the theory. This is the calculus and the design and what I can teach you. This is what, when you're going to go in practice and you are going to see the practice and you be in the field and you're going to learn this much. But if you fail, this is what your failure should be able to teach you, and you will grow. And that's the normal, that's the smart thing to do. Use something that we didn't foresee, that make us fail. We have to learn from this failure. So COVID should be there to teach us many things. And one thing is to say, COVID didn't broke any system. It just showed us that the system had flaws, and we have to repair them. So there are people reflecting on that, and we have to change from linear to circular. We have to go back to some principles: holistic thinking, collaboration, solidarity, leaving nobody behind, being inclusive. And we have to do both: mitigate the pollution, and then adapt. And I know as an engineers, we put so much emphasis in adaptation. I know, because that's what we know. We know, okay, let's building codes. I have another white paper on building codes. Yes, this is your professional reflect. But you have to reflect that if we don't succeed mitigation, we will never succeed adaptation, because we cannot forever adapt. The human, we cannot tolerate 2 degrees more. We will suffer. People will die. And they are already happening. You know, in Toronto, in Montreal, the big cities where the heat domes causes a lot of problem. And then now with the smoke, the air quality, it's really bad. Okay, so it's time to decarbonize. It's time to decarbonize. Science have told us about the cost. Engineers have developed many processes. We have biomass, wind, solar, tidal. And you should ask yourself, how is it possible that Canada, having the longest coastline in the world, Canada having the highest tides in the world, and in many places having the highest waves in the world, why we don't have one single tidal electric project? Why is that? if you engineers don't reflect on these things, I don't know who's going to. So we need to, the public opinion, I put there, I think, 60% or 70%, I cannot read, but this week I learned that a Reed Angus poll says that 85% of Canadians think that we are not doing enough at the climate front, and that they see the links between between life quality, affordability, economy, and the environment. They see it. So they see it. And if they see it, really, you know, anyway, I'm going to stop there. So, as you know, renewable energy follows a learning curve. So it's, you know, some people are calling it a free fall in cost. And it's the safest, it's the cleanest, and we have maps of Canada showing us the potential for wind, for biomass. In Quebec, in the last 5 years, we installed 2 huge biomethanization plants to take care of our organic waste coming from household and coming from wastewaters. And you will ask me, why? Well, the reason is because we run out of space for landfills. Our regulations have become so stringent that you cannot very easily open new landfills. Because of that obstacle, and in the need people develop ideas, we develop this. So what is missing? I was the sponsor of the Net Zero 2050 bill in the last year. The government asked me. And it's not because I'm a liberal. I'm not a liberal. I'm an independent senator. I'm not NDP. I'm not conservative. I am a scientist. I have an independent mind that tells me that this is what we need. At least we are putting a goal there. And so I helped the government and we passed this. But I told the government, you cannot just set the goal and don't say what are the paths. And so the paths are as important as the goal. So my bill, S243, that is in this white paper, talks about the different paths. So you know, I talked about mitigation, adaptation, and you know, you are aware of this. And if you can find, you know, places where these two overlap, that's the best thing. That's what we need to know. We need to build forward better after the pandemic. I produced another white paper on this, building forward better, learning from that. You know about this virtuous circle in which we all play a role. So scientists, we develop, then technology puts us there with practical things. Then we have experience, and we have to learn from that experience. And then government, we have to connect with government. We really have to connect with government. You know, I'm being lobbied all the time, all year long. I'm lobbied. At a point, I was, if you follow politics, I was the most lobbied senator in Canada during the environmental laws. And so I can tell you that there are some sectors that has enough money to bring 10 lawyers when they come to see you, 10, 12. And they come and they think that they can make you swallow whatever. But, you know, it's interesting because when people ask me, you know, how I'm surviving, and I said, well, they never see me coming. They see this little small woman there, you know, immigrant, and they think, oh, what she knows? She doesn't know nothing. So they send these lawyers, and the lawyers start talking to me. Like I remember one representative of the plastic industry, and he started talking to me that he said, my solution is to give to all municipalities a recycling program. And I said, you are a lobbyist. How are you going to do that? And he went, well, no, I'm not going to do it. The government is going to do it. I said, which government? Are you aware that we live in a federal, provincial, there is federal jurisdictions, and that waste is a provincial jurisdiction, you know? And then I start talking about how much do you recycle in your new package? How much paper do you use? How much plastic you create? Where the plastic comes from? And it happens to be from outside. We import, and then we export our plastic waste. And China, 2 years ago, decided not to receive anymore our plastic waste. I'm sorry. So there are the adaptation principles, professional judgment, integrated climate information, practical guidance. We need to be mentors of the young engineers, and we need to tell them what's evolving, what is happening. This is my white paper that I mentioned, and I hope that you have some time to read, because it's important. Economy, finances in the engineering world is very, very important. My bill has 7 actions. I won't go into each one of them, but I will tell you this, is that finance sector says that their fiduciary duty, the only one, is to produce revenues to their shareholders. That's the only one. And therefore, there is a lot of friction of how much they should do in environment, how much they should do for social impact, how much they should do in ethics and governance. This is their answer. However, what I can tell you now is that around the world, there has been many court cases about this fiduciary duty. And most of the, if not all, because I haven't seen one that doesn't say that, of the rulings of the court says that that's not. It is the benefit of the shareholder, is the benefit. It doesn't say is the monetary benefit. It says for the benefit. So many things can be included in there. One other thing is that these decision boards doesn't have climate expertise, and they need to have climate expertise. When there is only economists deciding, you see that it doesn't move, because they are having, again, a tunnel vision and don't see all the ripple effects. And I think that's it for me. Thank you so much. My door is open for any, the concerns from my fellow engineers, and I'd be happy to answer any question you may have. Thank you.
Senator Galvez, thank you so much. I think this is still true. You are still the only engineer in the Canadian Senate. So if anybody here is looking for another challenge, she needs company.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. We are very pleased to have the next 2 individuals here. First of all, Minister Marr from the British Columbia government, and I must say BC has been doing an astonishing job as a province at the provincial level. And I think it's important for the Academy to understand, historically we've had a lot of interaction with the federal government, but the issues that we're dealing with today, and the Senator mentioned this, are not uniquely federal. We're in a federal system, and you'll be hearing later on a number of the projects we have that are aimed at both municipal and provincial governments. So, but before the minister comes up, I would like to introduce Alan Winter. You probably know Alan from a variety of different roles. Probably the most recent was as the British Columbia Innovation Commissioner. But I know him from longer ago than I, yeah. We worked together putting together the NUMIC, the New Media Innovation Center. We worked together when he was chair of the Canadian Communications Research Center, and we both share a background in history and telecommunications. So he's going to give a few reflections on his life, and then we'll introduce the minister. So, Alan, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. And greetings and welcome to all the members who are here and coming to the conference. Thank you, Senator, for your talk. Your grandchildren are very fortunate, I would have to say. So thank you for that talk. In fact, I could have listened, I think, to the other 8 drivers that you were talking about in your speech. So thank you for that. And we're very much looking forward to hearing from the Minister as well. So I have 12 and a half minutes, and Robert's going to tell me when I'm close to the end of that. But I wanted to provide, as Robert has said, a little bit of reflection, but also perhaps some connecting questions for the conference, because I think the Senator has led off with a passionate speech about climate change, and this has to be part of our thinking as we move forward, and how do we put this into practice as we go forward ourselves. So I really have these 2 things to do. One is to provide you some personal observations from a rather eclectic career, but also to introduce the Minister, and particularly because of connections to British Columbia and the things that she is taking forward in BC as well. So just a couple of stories, perhaps. When I came to Canada to study many years ago, Canada was a land of opportunity, as we know, immense potential and a willingness to invest in infrastructure systems and institutions. It was to some extent an engineer's dream. And as an engineer, I was very interested in those days in the space program and in space applications. Canada was investing heavily, probably the most heavily, in terms of technology in the space business at that time, and partly because Canada had a huge land mass, and we were opening up the land mass, required communications and remote sensing during that time. So not only were we the 3rd nation in space, but we had the world's first geostationary satellite system, Telesat Canada, and our science, as you pointed out, Senator, our science was driving a lot of the engineering at that particular time. I was fortunate to be a project leader of a rather, I would call, sketchy project at that time, which was trying to locate downed aircraft and ships using satellites. And if this was the days before GPS and before communications other than satellite communications starting. We were fortunate because this system was called SARSAT, and it garnered a lot of international attention. And so the first members of that consortium, we were leading it, was Canada, France, US, and actually at the height of the Cold War, interestingly enough, the Soviet Union. But Canada provided most of the equipment for the satellite systems and most of the ground stations around the world. The system went operational in the 80s, and I'd moved on to Telesat Canada just at that point. And it's still a primary alerting system for distress. You know, if you take personal locator beacon into the mountains or whatever and turn it on, satellite system will tell you where, will send a signal to the rescue coordination centers and so on. And I mentioned this story a little bit because last month, COSPAS SARSAT system recorded its 50,000th rescue, which is amazing. And yet Canada has not really understood a lot of, or pushed perhaps, a lot of the benefit that Canada brought to the world around that. There was various reasons for its success, and this is what I wanted to bring out during the conference. First of all, it had a strong link to policy objectives, and that I think is what the Senator mentioned, across several departments in the federal government and involving the provinces. Secondly, it was built on a solid foundation of science, such that when we were designing spacecraft and ground stations and communication systems, Canadian engineers at a system level understood the system extremely well, and that translated into prosperity as we went forward. Thirdly, the investment in the space program in those days was directly linked to Canada's prosperity, with such policies in place as building the prime contractor capability in Canada at that time, which Robert will remember, Canadian supply chains for each of these things. So I mentioned that sort of as background to some of the discussion, some of the challenges the Senator gave us in her talk. Today we live in a very different Canada, but I believe the principles of success remain much the same. Today, our students are much more likely to be passionate about the environment, correctly so, the health of our society and our economy in Canada than particularly the space program. I'm an adjunct prof at University of Victoria in the business school, and as I deal with some of the students, I see that translates to specific concerns around climate change, specific concerns around social determinants of health in our society, and specific concerns about having good and meaningful jobs here in Canada. So I believe engineering has a role to play in each of these areas, but only if we collaborate across the many silos we have. Again, Senator, you mentioned the silos sometimes between departments, but we've got silos between provinces, we've got silos everywhere, we've got silos between professions. And that is really hurting us. So part of the role, I think, of CAE is to be able to transcend some of those silos. So my first question, kind of bringing together some of the thinking we've had, how do we together bring together engineering and policy to have more of an impact in Canada, and specifically around climate change? And this is one of the themes of the conference. And each province has really good examples of this, but they are still in silos, I think. Even in British Columbia, we have some spectacular projects which I think can contribute to understanding of climate change. Oceans Network Canada, for example, I'm on the board of, based here in the University of Victoria. It operates around Canada's coasts with underwater sensor systems. The network started many years ago with Neptune and Venus sensor systems. It's grown, I think, over the many years. It's now $500 million or so invested in Oceans Network Canada. It's one of the most sophisticated sensor systems in the world and is under contract with various government departments, including DFO. Now, interestingly, part of that has been in working with DFO on policy. And so the Ocean Protection Plan that was recently announced is part of the work that has gone together with Oceans Network Canada and the Department of Fisheries and Ocean. So it's a good example. Another example, which is more recent, the BC government and NRCan and Shell Canada got together and put together initial investment of about $105 million into the BC Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy. And that's really to fast-track technology and policy at the same time. And I think if we can do that, so there are many other examples across Canada. My second question is, how do we bring together science and engineering to tackle some of our more pressing challenges, specifically to address the social determinants in our health and in our health system? As engineers, we tend to shy away from biology, and I certainly did. Yet many of the challenges that we have are environmental or social. And engineering applies just as much to the biological world as it does to the physical world. And as we move towards a sustainable and circular economy that the Senator mentioned, such areas as biomanufacturing and synthetic biology become key to our future. And I think I chatted with John McDougall about that last night. Biology has been left to the scientists to some extent, and it's time the engineers were encouraged to enter the field. And part of that is because when I left the corporate telecom and IT world that Robert mentioned, I was president and CEO of Genome BC for 15 years. We raised about $750 million over that period to put into BC projects, understanding the genome of living things in human health, but also forestry, agriculture, environment, fisheries, and even microbial action in mining, for example. Now, what was interesting about that was that it brought together scientists and engineers to actually try and move products into market. It was extraordinarily difficult. But on one of the positive sides of that whole experience, it was one of my favorite jobs actually, was the positive aspects of looking for every project that went through our system. It had to have what we call a GELS component, and that was really genomics in ethics, in legal, and in social aspects. So interesting enough, I think when we started, people were pretty skeptical about bringing social scientists and engineers and scientists all in the same room and saying, what are our common goals? But I think by the end of that period of the 15 years that we'd done it, people accepted that was the way to go. And it was partly because we were able to show that it not only affected the success of projects, but it really affected the success of those projects moving into society. And I think that was a really important thing. So that was my second question. My third question and last question is, how do we bring together engineering and the economy for a more innovative and prosperous Canada? Specifically, how do we ensure we have the fiscal capacity for resilient communities and good jobs? And the Senator talked about investment in the transition that we have in front of us. And my concern, having been Innovation Commissioner here for a couple of years, was the fact that as I got into government, the fiscal capacity to make those changes is limited. And I think part of our issue at the moment is that we are thinking that the economy is kind of a silo to itself, and we can do all the other things. In fact, the economy is an integral part of everything that we do, and only because of that are we able to then reinvest in other areas. And we've got many things to be thankful for in Canada, not the least of which it's a beautiful country to live in. And currently we have close to full employment, but full employment doesn't necessarily mean that we have an innovative and prosperous country. We can have full employment and we are still hewers of wood and drawers of water, and our economic masters live in other places. In 2021, the OECD said that Canada would be the worst performing country in terms of GDP per capita of all 40 OECD countries from 2020 to 2030, and if nothing changes, the next 3 decades. That was incredible that they came out with that statement. And I think it's a wake-up call for us. I don't believe that we'll be the worst performing country for the next 3 decades, because I think we will respond to that. The initiatives that we put together, for example, I was part of the Clean BC plan in the government when it was being put together. And part of that plan is not only to deal with the environment, but to say, well, how do we benefit Canadian jobs or Canadian businesses, et cetera, by doing these things? And sometimes it's a matter of attracting companies to be part of the whole process, and then they can see that they can lead and they can export at the same time. So many of the issues that we've seen during COVID, for example, the supply chains and so on that we didn't have in the country, are partly because we've, I think, allowed the economy to be a separate part of some of the things that we're currently doing. But I think this has got to become a priority. So those are the 3 questions that I'd like us to think about as we go forward. It's themes that run through the conference. Engineering is at the heart of developing higher value products and services. And I'm convinced that we have both the responsibility and opportunity to link our Canadian engineering capacity to economic drivers. And so the questions that we might ask are, in our various investments, how is this benefiting Canadian business? Can government procurement be used better for developing our capabilities? Can we develop Canadian supply chains? Can we protect Canadian intellectual property? And so on. So these are the questions, I think, as we go forward in our transition. So in summary, Canada is still a land of opportunity, but the major challenges that I've mentioned of our changing climate, our health, and our economy are not simple challenges. They are interrelated and they're difficult. They require us to operate outside our comfort zones and above the silos that the Senator mentioned. I do think engineering plays a key role in each of them, and the CAE recognizes this, and as the Dean pointed out, the programs that we have in the conference cover a lot of these things, including the future of engineering. And I think as we look at the future of engineering, we should consider some of these questions or some of these areas as we go forward. And so the conference covers many of these topics. So I hope you enjoy the conference. Thank you very much. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Minister Bowinn for her keynote speech. So Bowinn is British Columbia's Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. She is a licensed professional engineer with a degree in civil engineering, a master's degree from UBC Sorter School of Business, and a certified project management professional. Bowinn previously served as Minister of State for Infrastructure, delivering major capital transportation infrastructure projects and supporting highway recovery efforts following the Atmosphere River events of November 2021. She has served as Parliamentary Secretary of TransLink, as a member of Cabinet Housing Working Group Committee, as a member of the Select Standing Committee on Public Accounts, a member of Treasury Board, and as Chair of the Select Standing Committee on Crown Corporations. Congratulations, that's a long list. Before being elected MLA for North Vancouver Lonsdale in 2017, Bowinn managed terminal expansion and the redevelopment projects at the Vancouver International Airport. What I found interesting was that she was the 4th female president of the UBC Engineers and led the reform of the organization. The Engineering Undergraduate Society annually awards the Bowinn Ma Award in recognition of exceptional dedication, service, and self-sacrifice by an individual in completing their duties, both within and beyond the purview of their position. Please welcome Minister Ma.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be able to join you here today on the territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Soheil and Esquimalt First Nations. As you heard, my name is Bowinn Ma, MLA for North Vancouver Lonsdale, Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. And it is my distinct honor to join you all as both an elected politician and an engineer, which means I stand before you as one of the very few people in BC, privileged enough to hold simultaneous membership in both one of the most and least trusted occupations in the world. So I will leave you to figure out which one is which. You know, as I sat down a little while ago to try to figure out what I was going to speak about today, I was looking for instructions on what ACE was looking for, or AEC was looking for, and the answer that I got back was, you know, talk about whatever you want. And I have to say that didn't really narrow things down for me. So I thought I would start today with by answering a question that regularly comes up when people find out that I'm an engineer. That before I was a politician, I was a professional engineer. And actually, you're probably all kind of wondering it now too, which is what in the world compelled me to go from engineering into politics? What in the world compelled me to put my engineering career aside and enter this rat race and enter into an election and fight for this spot and then become a politician? And of course, there were many reasons that led me to leave my job at the Airport Authority, become in politics, put my name on a ballot to run to be an MLA to where I am today, essentially serving as BC's Minister of Disasters and Existential Threat. And some of those reasons, I have to admit, evolved around what I didn't like about what was happening in the province, the choices the previous government made that really ticked me off. There was also, of course, a sense of duty that came from the realization that very few people are blessed with the circumstances in their lives that actually allow them to pursue this kind of public service. Of course, I felt a commitment to making our communities better for future generations. And all of those different reasons are true and all cumulatively led to my decision. But at the root of it all, was a realization that the true barriers to solving some of the most challenging and pressing issues that we face as a society and as a civilization, poverty, inequality, climate change, are not technical but political. You know, I was thinking to myself, Bowinn, what a strange thing to say to a room full of people who have accomplished so much in a highly technical field. But I think you've actually heard a little bit of the connections already today from the Senator, the Dean, and Dr. Winters. So don't get me wrong, the technical work you do and have done have been profoundly valuable in all sorts of ways and will continue to be. And clearly the accomplishments that you've achieved and your membership as a fellow of the Canadian Academy of Engineering shows that. What I mean instead is that for all of us in any field, even those of us in engineering, as we go through our careers and do the best that we can do to improve the lives of the people around us and the work that we do to hold paramount the safety and welfare of the public as obliged by us, by the oaths that we take as engineers. Many of us will eventually reach a place where our ability to do good is limited not necessarily by our technical capacity, but by the political will of society. Poverty, wealth inequality, energy transitions, climate change, these are highly complex and political issues that don't disappear when we've applied the correct factor of safety to our designs or come up with the most brilliant technically possible solution. Because you can't implement those solutions without resources, trade-offs, and aligned regulatory framework or societal will. And for most of these challenging societal problems, the source of those resources, the decisions to make trade-offs, and the societal will to create change is directly tied to the politics of the day. Because politics isn't just about governments or politicians or elections or political parties. Politics stems from the way that we as human beings believe we understand and therefore interact with each other, our environment, and the world. So from environmental regulations and building codes to the distribution of social funding and the issue of poverty, governments and politics end up deciding the fundamental framework within which people live and work, succeed, fail, suffer, or die. And so I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't ignore that connection to the work that I was wanting to accomplish, the good that I was wanting to do. Heavy stuff. It's been a kind of a heavy morning this morning. You know, if you had asked me 7 years ago when I started my political journey where I would end up and where I thought that I would end up doing, serving as Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness for the province of British Columbia was not what I would have guessed. Probably most of all because this position really didn't exist until about 6 months ago when I was sworn in. But similarly, when I think back to what it was like even just 7 years ago, when it came to public discourse around climate change, we didn't talk about it back then the way that we talk about it now. Climate change and the need to take action on climate was one of the most important issues that drove me into elected politics back in 2017. But even then, we spoke of climate change as something that was on the horizon. You know, we spoke of it as an issue that our children and our grandchildren would have to deal with. It was less than half a decade later, in 2021, when we experienced catastrophic calamities throughout British Columbia, the likes that we had never seen before. We had a record-breaking heat wave that resulted in the death of over 600 people in a matter of days. We had a devastating wildfire season that saw, among other impacts, an entire village of Lytton wiped off the face of the planet in 15 minutes. A 2-day atmospheric river event that flooded homes and farmlands, washed away roads and infrastructure, displaced more than 3,300 people, and dramatically impacted the lives and livelihoods of people across the province. And from that 2-day event alone, the military had to be called in to evacuate travelers that had been stranded between landslides for days. Highways were washed out, some so completely that there were areas left looking like a highway had never existed there before. Communities were isolated for months. We saw river bottoms scoured so severely from the hydrological activity that had swept through there, leaving rivers so wide and so shallow that temperatures rose dangerously the following summer and fish could not pass through them. Canada's most productive agricultural lands were underwater for weeks, destroying farms, killing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of livestock. The thousands of animals that did survive the initial flooding had to be euthanized by their farmers in the weeks following for lack of clean water and food for them. Supply chains shut down. Fuel shortages threatened our province. Emergency orders restricted travel, putting caps on how much gas you could pump into your cars. Still today, we are only a part of the way through the recovery process of what we experienced in that 1 year alone. The climate crisis is here, and it is here now, it is here today. It is no longer a problem that we fear leaving to our children or our grandchildren. It is one that we face down every single day. Thus, the creation of my ministry, the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, the first of its kind in Canada, born from recognition of the realities of climate change and an acknowledgement that even as we do the work that we must do to drive down greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change to begin with, so must we be ready to face the impacts of climate change that are already here. And given the increasing frequency, scale, and scope of extreme weather events as a result of that changing climate, it is no longer sufficient for us to be good at responding and recovering from events. We must also prepare for and actively mitigate the impacts of those hazards before disasters happen. British Columbia was the first jurisdiction in Canada to adopt the UN Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction, which means that we committed to 4 priorities. The first is to understand disaster risk. The second, to strengthen disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. The third, to invest in disaster risk reduction for resilience. And fourth is to enhance disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So that is the work before us. To understand disaster risk, my ministry, in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, is developing a provincial approach to understanding the disaster risk in the context of climate change. The Disaster and Climate Risk and Resiliency Assessment will help interpret the data that's already available about what climate change will do to our risk of natural disasters so that it can inform decision-making across all levels of government. So interpreting this highly technical data into something that is easily understood by governments, even small communities. To invest in disaster risk reduction, we're making historic investments into our Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, recently topped up with an additional $180 million for a total of $389 million devoted to local governments and First Nations projects to help them better prepare for emergencies and reduce the risk of future emergencies in their communities. Of course, given all that's going on, that's really a drop in the bucket. And we must do additional significant mitigative work on provincial infrastructure as well, while cost-sharing larger projects with the federal government, especially as we work to rebuild and build back better from previous emergencies. Our entire ministry is committed to improving our preparedness posture in advance of the next catastrophic event. And to strengthen disaster risk governance in order to manage disaster risk, I will be tabling modernized emergency management legislation in the fall. I'm also expecting my first child in mid-November, and I took a look at the dates and I said, okay, so the first day I can table this new emergency management legislation is the very first day of sitting in October. And if the baby is exactly on schedule, which I hear babies always are, then I will have exactly 6 weeks to get this massive piece of legislation through all the stages of debate and pass it. So if you could just stay in there until you're properly due, then I think we'll be okay. But this modernized emergency management legislation will lean on all of the principles of the UN Sendai framework and incorporate all 4 phases of emergency management. So that's preparation, mitigation, response, and recovery. It will also create the space required to recognize First Nations and Indigenous governing bodies as equal partners in emergency management, as nations and entities with their own inherent rights and authorities that must be recognized, respected, and understood. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this last item because it is arguably one of the most important and complex components of work that my ministry does. British Columbia alone, just our province alone, is home to 204 independent First Nations with overlapping territories, all in different states of recovery in a variety of ways since colonization destroyed their societies. Supreme Court rulings confirm that their titles have not been extinguished and that our obligation to respect their inherent rights as nations stands. In an emergency management context, this authority and inherent right can be key to the safety of their people and their communities, particularly in remote locations. And the Indigenous knowledge that these communities can offer is helping to reduce the risk of hazards ahead of time. Can be helpful and invaluable. Many of our wildfire challenges, for instance, stem from an unnatural buildup of fuels because we fought every fire for so many decades instead of letting the forest burn it off naturally through lower temperature burns. We now incorporate cultural burns or controlled burns into our forests, into our wildlife management protocols, but it's relatively new to us, and the damage may already be done. Earlier this year, we saw controlled burns behave in ways far more aggressive than they should have because of the hotter temperatures and drought conditions we found ourselves in as early as April. We are not yet in summer, and the summer season is, of course, the peak wildfire season. And here in British Columbia, we have already burned through more hectares of forests than the vast majority of the last 20 entire wildfire seasons. Still, the need to recognize and work with Indigenous communities to ensure that we create capacity and space for them to exercise their rights in these regards cannot be ignored. And groundbreaking agreements are already being developed in different areas of the province that incorporate First Nations as equal partners in this work. In the interior of British Columbia, a tripartite collaborative emergency management agreement between the Silcotilne National Government and the governments of British Columbia and Canada establishes capacity funding to the First Nation and creates a formal structure for collaboration that ensures that Silcotilne communities inform decisions that affect them, their families, and their territories while prioritizing the importance of cultural safety and Indigenous knowledge in wildfire and emergency management. Further south, I was recently in the territory of the Soheil First Nation, where the Soheil First Nation and the province signed the historic Fraser River Debris Trap Co-Management Agreement, a first-of-its-kind agreement that formally recognizes both governments as co-managers of provincial infrastructure. In the Fraser Valley, which spent weeks underwater in 2021, the Sumas River Flood Mitigation Collaborative Framework was signed by BC, Samath First Nation, Matsqui First Nation, Lakamo First Nation, the City of Abbotsford, and the City of Chilliwack to develop a collaborative flood mitigation strategy for the Sumas Prairie, together as one team, incorporating both modern engineering techniques for the building of protective gray infrastructure, as well as Indigenous knowledge and nature-based solutions, which means designing our communities to understand and work with water rather than against it, finding room for the river to flow, finding places for the water to deposit when flood levels rise. None of these agreements were easy to come by, though. None of these agreements signal the end of difficult conversations and hard work ahead, but none of this work is meant to be easy. And in fact, decades of doing things the easy way has arguably resulted in us making the same mistakes over and over and brought us to where we are today. I'm coming up to the end of my time. I don't know how long I've been talking for, but I'd like to conclude by sharing a saying that's come up quite a bit for me since I started to work building out this new ministry, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. The road to recovery for British Columbia will be long and difficult, as will the work to address the climate crisis at its core. But there are also reasons to be hopeful. We're setting aside our hubris and collaborating with new partners more fully and with more commitment than ever before. And we have engineers like you working across disciplines, coming up with new solutions and techniques that help us understand and manage the quickly evolving circumstances that we find ourselves in. And we have seen communities come together and support one another in times of crisis in ways that inspire and renew our faith in the compassion and resiliency of humanity. The challenges ahead for all of us are very, very real. And the path that we travel, that we must travel, as a species to survive is long and far. But I do have hope, and I do believe that we will get to where we need to go, but only if we go together. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Minister Ma, for a truly inspirational talk. We have a few minutes now. You don't even know if I want questions. I think, yes, let's start here. We have a microphone, please.
Thank you. Karen Savage. I'm a member of the EGBC Foundation, and it came to my attention that we have a donor who would like to endow a scholarship in coastal engineering, and then it came to my attention that we have no coastal engineering program in BC. As a practicing professional who has had projects on the coastline of BC and who recreates in the coastline of BC, I know that the tidal range in BC is 16 feet, which is not an insignificant amount of energy. I also know that the First Nations have many of their lands in and close to the intertidal zones, which are very rich in BC. And so I would like to hear responses from the panel about this gap in engineering education and clean energy potential, maybe starting with Rosa and then passing to Bowinn and then to me, and then to somebody from UVic, which could be Mina, Alan, throwing my friend Elizabeth under the bus, or her, or her president, Kevin. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much for the question. You know, yes, it's a little bit illogical for a city that is in the coast not to have a training in this very important area. And we have so much potential in Canada. Now we have from coast to coast to coast. And there are some sectors that are really taking advantage of this new possibility of going through the Arctic. And we Canadians, we aren't. So I know that there are some new initiatives. Like, for example, in the St. Lawrence River, now we have a university there that is very much progressing into coastal engineering, and I will support this type of project. If you need my help, if you need me to guide somebody, I'm there. Thank you.
Bowinn, if you could speak to the vulnerability of the indigenous nations that are along the coastline in your response, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, these are very specific questions. I mean, there are certainly a lot of nations that live very close to the coastline and depend on the coastline as well. I'm thinking in particular of Haida Gwaii. And I'm speaking a bit from my experience back from the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure when I was Minister of State for Infrastructure. One of the questions I had asked was actually whether we had concerns about provincial infrastructure impacts as a result of the rising nature of king tides, because for a long time, king tides have been kind of held back because of it's getting a little, I'm not going to be able to say it, but because of the position of the Earth and the Sun, the king tides have actually been somewhat subdued, and now we're seeing them rise up again. And are there areas that we're particularly concerned about, especially given what we've seen on the seawall down in the Burrard Inlet? There is a highway that runs, I believe, through Haida Gwaii that we're keeping a close eye on. Most provincial infrastructure is not along the coastline, though, but a lot of properties are, certainly. And we know how critically important the coast and the waters are for all of our prosperities.
Okay. Can we get a microphone over there and then over there?
Over there.
Thank you very much. I'm Nemi Banthi, I'm professor at UBC. My question relates more to innovation, and I think particularly, you're talking about climate readiness. what our experience has been that it's very hard and difficult to bring innovation into construction. You talked about the atmospheric river and the bridges being lost, et cetera. But in this very low bid environment, somehow it's very hard to bring innovation into our built environment, which is very, very vulnerable, for example. So as a way of bringing innovation, I mean, you cannot change the global emissions by being such a small country, but what you can do is, in fact, prepare the country for climate emergencies and disasters. So can you somehow bring into our bidding process, say 2% of the total project cost that could go into bringing innovation into the program or into the particular construction?
I think it depends a lot on the project, and certainly there are ministries that are able to incorporate, I guess, decision-making into their procurement decisions that are not necessarily tied to low bid. I'm thinking in particular, the Ministry of Health is able to do that. Currently, the Ministry of Transportation is, the Transportation Act does bind them a bit, but I know that the ministry is looking for ways to basically create big bid calculations and scoring sheets that are about more about the best bid rather than just the lowest bid, because we end up paying one way or another. You often go for the lowest bid and you end up having to make up with it with shoddy workmanship or change orders or otherwise. And so it is something that is top of mind. I will say from a climate readiness perspective, from my ministry's perspective, one of our challenges is actually not necessarily the bid or procurement process. It's the fact that communities weren't built for the hazards whatsoever. So we have communities, some communities that are still actively developing in known floodplains. And so that is a much more fundamental, like a fundamental problem that we've got to deal with before we even get to the part about the point about talking about procurement processes. Like communities are still struggling to figure out how they grow in smarter ways. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us.
I think you need some kind of a process there, because I remember we were trying to place these sensors, or scour sensors on Highway 8, and it was an uphill battle, basically. So I think I need to understand really what is the kind of a mechanism or a policy there is to bring innovation without having to face these hurdles, basically. So.
Sorry, I'm not sure I picked up on the question.
Well,
I
it was
couldn't quite hear it.
No, I meant we were trying to place some scour sensors in some of the bridges actually on Highway 8 actually, and it was a very difficult process.
Well, we're currently in the process of trying to figure out how to rebuild Highway 8 so the history of Highway 8 is, for those of you who don't know, Highway 8 is one of the highways that was significantly washed out in 2021. It's a 69-kilometer highway that connects Cache Creek to Spence's Bridge. It's a secondary highway, really. It's very important to some of the communities that are along that highway and some of the secondary economic access routes, but people don't really hear about it because it's not the Coquihalla. The Coquihalla is the big one that's really, that BC is really dependent on. But during 2021 atmospheric river event, what we saw were washouts that destroyed well over 65% of that highway. And that highway, you take a look at the photographs, and you can see segments of highway just hanging there on the side of the slope. And they just kind of start suddenly and they end suddenly because everything else has been washed away. And part of the challenge with that highway as well was it was never actually built to be a highway. It started out probably a game trail, and then a walking trail, and then it was a wagon trail. And then sometime in the 1950s, I think we paved it and numbered it and called it a highway. So it's on highly, highly silty substrate. And there is significant work happening right now to understand how best to recreate that highway to modern day standards given the conditions and given the realities of climate change in that area. I suspect that now is probably a good time to reach out to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure again with your sensor opportunities, because we're basically rebuilding the entire thing.
Thank you. We're just over here, and then
Hello, I'm David Wilkinson from UBC. My question is for Senator Galvez and anyone else that would like to check in on it. And it regards the governance of our country and how we can accelerate the federal or the overall government processes. I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions of how to do that, because we see from the federal government now lots of plans, but they're 5-year plans. They're often beyond the political 4-year cycle. We also see that low-hanging fruit, like, for example, making use of the public service to use new technologies that advances towards clean energy. We don't see that happen. And then there's the issue always between the federal government and the province. So Canada has some very significant challenges, and I was just wondering if you could give us some insight on how we might be able to deal with that to accelerate the process, because this is an urgent issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. Your question is a question that comes up very often from frustrated citizens that wonder how they can influence the government. And there are, the positive thing is that there are many ways, many ways. Maybe it's a lack of information, a lack of knowledge, but let me tell you, as I mentioned, we receive tons of lobbyists. And it's very interesting to know that some professions have very, very strong lobbyists coming to Ottawa. So you, as us, as a group of engineers under an aegide, and you can very easily come to Parliament, send some people, and ask for meeting with the parliamentarians at House of Commons and the Senate. And usually, you will get to meet with people, and you will explain. You will have 30, 40 minutes to explain what are your issues. Another way is that you have a local representative, a local MP and a local senator. And you can write letters to them, to both of them, the same letter, and have it signed by the people that lives close to you. And so that this is another place. Another way is that both houses, House of Commons and the Senate, we conduct studies. So for example, the Minister of Transport and Communication conducted a very short, very quick study on extreme weather events and impacts just after what happened in Fraser River Valley. And it was short, but anybody could have sent a letter or a document, a report, and have requests to appear before this committee and have their voices heard. And these hearings are public, so you can always publicize, diffuse that you're going to appear, and so people tune in, and everything is online, so you can pass your message through that too. When the committees are doing any other study, or they are studying a particular legislation, you can always send to us, as the Canadian Academy of Engineering, say, this is my opinion on this topic, that I want to appear. And they don't have choice but to answer you, really. So there are many ways. There are petitions too. So there are petitions that can be started, and the number is very low. And once the number is reached, a petition is read in the House of Commons, and so it gets attention. So these are ways that you can do. With respect to joining other movements, I told you that we all wear different hats. So right now we are all wearing the hat of we are all engineers, members, fellows of this association or this society. But we go back home, and then we wear many other hats. And I have been contacted by grannies for the environment, doctors for the environment, lawyers for the environment, nurses for the environment, youth for the environment, and you can join any of these groups. And really, I really encourage you, because you will be exchanging with fellow citizens, and you will see that you're not alone thinking in the same thing, but that we are a big mass of people all worry about the same thing, and even having the same ideas on how to go about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Camille Gabriel, and if you allow me, I would like to just respond to the question about innovation, and then I have couple of comments. And I will respond to the question of innovation in my capacity that I served as the ADM for Research and Innovation at the Government of Ontario. So I had a chance to think deeply and find the root of why innovation in Canada is not progressing as it should be. And I can tell you two major reasons that I have found. Number one is connectivity, and Minister Ma has reflected on that we are geographically so separate, and connectivity is a challenge for us to bring innovation together. And I have a lot of stories to tell, but I can do it on a coffee break. The second one is procurement, government procurement. We are a country that continues to be risk adverse. We don't want to take risk. And the government needs to learn from the US, from Britain, which I went and spent a lot of time talking to those people, that the government have to take that risk. And by taking that risk for new innovation will allow a lot of ideas to mature beyond what we have seen 1 in 10 die in the valley of death of innovation. A little commercial, I have my book called The Anatomy of Innovation outside there, and I elaborate on all those subjects. Okay, so just going back to Senator, thank you so much for being an engineer representing us in the government. I know the challenges, I found them myself firsthand, and they asked me to continue, but I said no. You talked about mitigation and adaptation, but I think I teach heat transfer, I teach thermodynamics. I teach my students that the second law of thermodynamics says that system moves in one direction and you cannot reverse them. So I think, what would you feel about adding prevention? Really, we can do a lot by adding prevention to the very elaborate presentation that you gave and that white paper that I think everybody should read. So that's my first comment. The second one is you talked about the safest clean energy sources, but you did not mention the silver bullet, hydrogen. I think hydrogen has a huge future for Canada, has a great print in the country in different locations. And I personally have been involved in that research, and I know that it has a great potential. So I just wanted to thank you personally for that and just add those comments. And I welcome any response. Thank you.
Yeah, we're just coming up to the break, and I know people have been sitting here for
Okay, so first about procurement. I think I share with your chair about that in communications with the US Corps of Engineers, American Society of Civil Engineers, and with them we have approached the World Bank, the IMF, the Inter-Asian Bank, and the Inter-American Bank. Why? Because of this procurement. And what we are asking to them is that they align their procurement with our climate choices, with our climate commitments. Okay? And so they are ahead. You are absolutely right. The Americans are ahead. And the American engineers, I don't know how, and maybe answer to that, is I don't know how they come to influence very strongly some politicians in the US Congress. And so the US Inflation Reduction Act and the Jobs Act has as a basis work coming from both from the Academy of Science and from US Canadian Society, American Society of Civil Engineers. So there are ways, there are mechanisms, and we should learn from them. These banks, these multilateral banks, have already said that they are aligning to Paris and they are changing their procurement rules to leave place for innovation. So we have to learn from there and bring it down to our federal, to our provincial, and to our municipality. Hydrogen. It's true, I didn't mention, but if you go to my website, the the committee that I chair on energy, environment, and natural resources, we just finished publishing a whole report on hydrogen. What are the venues for hydrogen in Canada? But again, just to give you a very small taste of what we experience in the Senate is that the Minister of Environment wanted to calculate how much hydrogen potential we have in Canada because he wants to electrify transport. The Natural Resources Minister wanted to know how much potential of hydrogen we have in Canada because he wants to give projects to developers. So they both did the same thing and they came up with two reports and the data is different. And we had to bring the Commissioner for the Environment to explain us because they didn't want it to explain us individually what was the hypothesis. And of course, at the beginning, it's the hypothesis that you make that makes that your model comes to very different situation. But the worst is that Ministry of Transport comes and he's answering our question, and I ask him this question. So you, Ministry of Transport, are going to use the data to know how much hydrogen station, hydrogen for heavy-duty trucks, which number are you going to use? And he was not even aware of the two reports. So we really have to push that these departments connect and that they do because there is a lot of inefficiency. And that's why the low-hanging fruits that we have identified doesn't come to reality. Thank you. I will be available at the coffee if you want to talk more about any of these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And I think we're, it's interesting to me, and it's been interesting since I took over as executive director of the Academy, just the degree to which, from wherever we come from the country, whatever path we've taken through our careers, there's an engineering perspective on the challenges that we're facing going forward, which has a remarkable harmonizing effect on how we see the problems and the paths forward to fix them or understand where the uncertainties lie and where the risk management needs to come in. And I think our speakers today have just done an amazing job of putting that into context. I will say, because you touched on a real sore point for me, when I'm dealing with our colleagues in the National Academy of Engineering, which is the US Academy or the Royal Academy of Engineering, they are very tightly tied into their government policy making. In fact, I was told that both the CHIPS Act and the IRA Act started a number of years ago within the Academy of Engineering in the US. And it's sort of a sore point with me that the US Academy has twice as many fellows we do, but their executive director has 1,000 times the budget that I have. And they have 300 employees. Their president actually gets paid. So we've got some structural work to do, but I think you'll find that it is an important lesson for us that in countries that are more effective at this, it is their engineering academies that are playing a vital role in bringing clear thinking and paths forward to policymakers. And hopefully discussions such as this one today will help Canada reach that point as well. So please, I'd like to get a round of applause. Often at these events, we give out gifts. We don't actually give out gifts at the Academy. We will be making donations to the Canadian Engineering Memorial Fund in honor of the 14...
Not forgotten.
Sorry.
Not forgotten.
The 14 women who lost their lives at Polytechnic. Anyway, just to say, that's how we'll finish up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.